Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where today a Star Trek game is going to boldly go where no other had gone before. Into the third dimension. So let's check out Star Trek Generations. Star Trek Generations, the PC game, was developed by Microprose and released in 1997. Which by my maths is a good 2 to 3 years after the release of the film. The UK edition was sponsored by the Sci-Fi Channel, back when they spelt their name correctly and showed, science fiction. The back of the box is bringing the hype, as it's the first 3D Star Trek game. You get to pilot the Enterprise, and experience the first truly immersive Star Trek game, as it has real music, sounds, and video sequences. Inside the box we get a surprisingly chunky manual, seeing that this is only English, and it goes into great detail on the various modes of the game. And with these great little pop-ups at the side from various crew members to give you hints on how to play. Under that we get the extent of that Sci-Fi Channel association, as there's a leaflet mentioning the next film which had already been released by this point. And on the other side it talks about some of the shows that you could have watched. And finally, once we get past the registration cards, we get the game on 2 CDs, which actually has a very nicely printed label. And seeing that it boasted that it followed the story of the film, it's not a surprise that we get a recap when we start the game, and it uses footage from the movie.
On this mission was purely ceremonial.
3.4. We are en route to the Abagosa Science Station in response to a distress call. They have reported an attack by unknown forces.
Now there's no title screen or main menu, it will just drop you straight into the game. But hitting escape will bring up the options menu, and it has that very LCARS look about it. And that will allow you to load or save your game, as well as make other changes to your controls. Or be able to alter some basic graphic options, or the difficulty settings, which oddly goes from medium to low to then high. Outside of the options we find ourselves in Stella Cartography, which is where you'll spend a large part of the game while you're on the ship. That's right, not the bridge as you might expect, but we will go into that in a little bit more detail in a bit. As the first thing we need to do is head over to the Amargosa Observatory and find out what's going on.
Commander Riker to the transporter room.
And this gives us the chance to play as the Horn Man himself, William T. Riker.
Captain, these blast patterns are consistent with Type 3 disruptors,
which narrows it down to Klingons, Romulans, or Bree.
Who doesn't have anything to lean his leg against, so I think we just gotta go out and find something. All while saving some staff and shooting a few Romulans along the way, as this is a first-person adventure with some shooting for good measure. This actually predates what most people think as the first Star Trek FPS, Star Trek Klingon Honor Guard, and as such this is a software-rendered game. But one that's a bit more Doom than it is Quake, with it using sprites and levels that aren't truly 3D. It also has quite a small draw area, with over half the screen being taken up by this information panel, which, unsurprisingly, has some useful information. Now I think it could have been made a lot smaller, or even have it as a pop-up, but this is what we ended up with. The left-hand box allows you to select between various bits of information like your health, or a map, or just some general information. The middle is the interaction area. Now if you're next to something that you can work with, it'll show up here. This includes buttons, panels, and various other puzzles that you'll find along the way.
functioning normally.
It also gives you the option of being able to set the strength of your weapon. You can either be a low stun or a high powered kill shot, which unsurprisingly will use up more power, so you'll have to keep an eye on that. The right side is the inventory, as you can pick up various items as you go along, and it allows you to use them or interact with them, such as setting which weapon is active if you've collected more than one, turning the tricorder on and off, or calling back to the ship, which might give you some hints, but can also be used to transport people back to the ship. And with that out of the way, I think it's time to come on to one of the big issues with this game, the controls. As while you can remap the keyboard inputs, which includes setting strafe buttons so you can use WASD if you want, you will butt up against the mouse input, as by default, when you move the mouse around, it changes where you're currently aiming if you happen to be in the top half. But it will not move your view. To do that, you'll have to hold down the right mouse button. Now this really feels counterintuitive these days, and even back then it felt a little bit weird.
Stop.
I could see it making more sense if you had to interact with the world from the first person view, but that is mostly done through that bottom half of the screen. So they could easily have done something like right clicking to switch between aiming and interacting, but instead we have to deal with this. I personally find it better to think of it more like Doom, with you mostly using the keyboard, and only using the mouse to aim when it's really needed, or if you have to really look around. So let's try to think of the game in those terms, and let's see what the game has to offer. Now most of the missions do have a similar end goal: find Soren and stop whatever he is doing. Now this will involve some puzzle solving, which mostly means finding the right object and using it somewhere in the world. There are no inventory puzzles here, such as combining anything. It's just using the right item in the right place in the world, which can be a bit harder than you might expect.
Now we're getting somewhere.
And being that this is a first-person game, there's also lots of shooting to be done. But we'll look into both of those in more detail as we go over some of the other missions. As right now I think it's best to head back to Stella Cartography.
Have you completed your analysis of the Romulan tricorder we recovered?
Yes, sir. Apparently, the Romulans were concerned that Soren might use their trilithium.
Because as I mentioned earlier, you will spend a lot of time here.
Fear was quite justified.
As well, it was a major new set for that Generations movie, so you can see why they might want to use it for the game. But it would have been nice if we got to see the bridge at least. From here we can actually see our progress, or at least your losses anyway, as you can clearly see the stars that have been destroyed. You can also simulate the destruction of various systems to try and work out where Soren might be going next.
Simulating destruction of Viridian. Projected nexus path intersects Viridian 3.
But the game won't let you sit around too long, as you'll see fleets moving around between the various systems, or even get hints of what's going on that will let you track down where that mad doctor might be. Now this will typically require you to fly to a system to do a short range scan, and every action that you do will move on the clock, so if you take too long to find him, or you move around too many systems, then you might actually lose one of those suns, because you missed that mission. And if you lose too many of them, then, well, as you can imagine, it's game over. The order you do these missions in, though, is practically random, so you won't always know where it is you need to go. Not until those hints show up anyway. And once you've learned the locations of the various systems and what each hint means, then you shouldn't have to worry too much about missing one. Now there are two main sets of missions that can be triggered from here. There's the away missions that we've seen, and space battles.
Targeting weapons system.
Now these really haven't improved much since the earlier Star Trek adventure games. You must move the Enterprise around like it's a fighter from something like Wing Commander, and then you just have to try and pummel the enemies with your phasers and photon torpedoes. The thing that makes this harder is that you have a very limited number of torpedoes, which aren't replenished between missions. So the number you start the game with is all you have till the end. And as you can imagine, this really slows down those space battles, as phasers can take a long time to get through those shields. All the while you're most likely being attacked by more than one ship. But you can try to be strategic by targeting specific systems to give you a chance, with weapons and power systems being the main ones to try and take out first. But they will repair them given enough time, so you'll have to keep pounding them to take them out. These space battles have always been a bit of a low point in the game so far, and I don't think this one really improves things all that much. And there's some really hard battles for you if you play this game, as one of the last ones have you fighting against up to 8 ships from 3 different races. Thankfully you can run away from most of these, which can be preferable, as not all of them will result in a loss of a solar system. The away missions though are the real heart of this game, as you get to play as the entire bridge crew at some point. But not always in ways that you might expect. Worf, for example, gets a covert mission, where you might have guessed it, he has to go undercover on a Klingon planet. For a Klingon mission, there's a lot less action and shooting than you might expect, as you just start off on this planet's surface, where you'll have to use a rebreather as there isn't any air.
As I have heard.
And yes, that sound will continue all while you use it. So if that's not an excuse to go underground, I'm not sure what is. The levels are quite large, but so much of it tends to be a red herring, as they're there more to confuse you than to help, as the mission briefings tend to be, well, brief. They just tell you, stop Soren for the most part, and you just have to try and work out how to do it. And the way you complete the mission might not always be what you might expect. As in this mission, you have to get to the secure room in the middle of the base, and to do that you head towards that crashed Romulan vessel we saw at the beginning. But you don't actually get into it. Instead, you fall through the ground and end up in an animal's den. And you then have to go through a set of platforming sections to then just stumble across a dead Klingon with a pass. From that security room, you can then unlock the various birds of prey. But what's the actual goal here? Well, it's to take a broken part from one of the damaged vessels and put it in Soren's bird of prey, which will result in it blowing up. Now that's a lot of Klingons killed, just to stop some trilithium.
If they engage the warp drive, this ship will be destroyed.
Ping is launching. Soren's bird of prey has been sabotaged. Clear the northwest landing area. Crash landing imminent.
I'm really not sure that Starfleet sanctioned that mission.
Enterprise, I have stopped Soren.
Beverly's mission, on the other hand, feels more like Star Trek, as you end up on this living planet that has these big blobs floating around that act as antibodies. And, well, they take a disliking to your tricorder of all things. So if you turn it on, they will attack you. So you have to play a large part of the level with it off, which makes it much harder, as the tricorder provides you with your health as well as the map. And the first thing you have to do is travel around this huge maze to try and find these two mechanical units and take them out. Because the goal here is not to kill, but to heal this great creature. So taking out Soren's nasty devices, then healing the damage, is our main way to complete our task.
This node is dying from the machine's activity. That should do it. There's nothing here to collect.
Which is a really cool idea and really fits in with Beverly as a character. Or at least when she's not finding weird ghost candles from her great-grandmother. What makes this section a little bit annoying is that maze is really hard to navigate. There are just lots of what I call the bean rooms that act as junctions, and then you stumble across the follicle areas that have these doors that look like, well, you know. But every so often you can find a nice quiet area to turn on the tricorder to try and find your bearings. Just remember to turn off the life sign readings, or you'll end up with quite the mess. Later areas are much easier to navigate, but you will come across these large viruses that will just attack you on sight. So you gotta keep that phaser handy, and eventually you get to travel around this creature's heart. Overall, it's a very creative mission. Which makes Geordi's mission feel a little bit off, as if you manage to save Armagosa before, you get to return, but the station is in a much worse state. And on top of that, there's a Klingon bird of prey that's totally stuffed with Klingons that are docked to the station. So this can turn into a real bloodbath. And can you just imagine Geordi, of all people, going full on Rambo with them? Or using his engineering skills to suck them all out into space?
Correction, sir. That's blown out.
It's really not the mission you would expect from him.
Stop!
Stop!
Where really, I would have thought you would have to fix something and do a pure puzzle mission. That would have been far more his speed. Or, you know, something on the holodeck. But nope, the closest we get to that is with Data, who on one of the missions gets transported down to this planet that has that classic Star Trek trope, the never-ending war. As both sides were wiped out, but the weapons have continued on. This one has some cool puzzles, which you have to use these drones that follow these tracks to open areas for you. But they don't go to all the places that you need to, so instead you need to find this thingamajig and place it on the floor that will stop them. This then allows you to reprogram them so they'll go where you need them to.
Detox area dropped from route. Power center now. Storage area now included in route. Access disabled.
This mission has some puzzles that are a little bit moon in their logic, as you come across this invisible force field, which is fine as we find out how to turn off its energy from the power center, which just so happens to have this really odd ability to kill you if you just play around with the controls. But turning it off will also stop the lift from moving, so we have to find a way to disable the force field and then turn the power back on.
Perhaps they have done the same here.
Which obviously requires you to find the axionic flux inverter and use it on the force field generator. Now, just outside of just picking everything up, which there are a lot of random items in this level, and then just using them all on that object, you're not really going to guess what you need. And you might not even spot the force field generator, as you have to stand just right for it to show up. I think the main way you're meant to solve this puzzle is by asking for help, as you can contact the Enterprise to get advice from the crew by using the comm badge, which you might have noticed are voiced by the original cast, including Malcolm McDowell, who returns as the voice of Soren.
Recommend alternate targets!
Troy even gets to go out and have a bit of fun, but not on Riser. No, instead she has to go undercover as a Romulan to infiltrate a Romulan base, which is a nice callback to that episode where she was a member of the Tal Shiar. Now, as you might expect, you end up having to use their tools and tech. So you have a disruptor rather than a phaser, and you have their version of the tricorder as well as their hyposprays. But even on regular missions, picking up the enemy's weapon is advisable, as they can wake up if you didn't hit them with a high enough stun blast. So if they do wake up, they are at least armless. But on top of that, you're also more likely to find recharge cells for their weapons than your own, as running out of power for your phaser can be a real problem, as you have to take on Soren at the end of most of the levels, and you'll need a weapon with a decent amount of charge, as you want to set its power pretty high. So quite often you'll have to find this balance between shooting everything with full power and just not shooting anyone at all. And some baddies can only be taken down with weapons that are set to a specific power level, so you might have to experiment with each of them.
This might be just what I need.
Even Picard gets to visit an old race, this one from the final Unity days, the Chodak.
Very well. The Chodak are an enigmatic race. It may take decades before we understand.
You will not find him here. Be gone.
The Chodak must leave their shells here before entering the sand baths.
And ends up having to pew-pew a few alien plants, as he works his way through these magma-filled caverns. Though he does get to borrow one of those neat hoverpods that you see them floating around in, as well why should the captain have to walk everywhere? And you will need to use these pods, as if you take too much damage you'll either get arrested, or more typically you'll get transported back to the Enterprise just before you die. And don't think saving will help you mid-mission, as effectively it acts as a checkpoint at the very start. There's no way to save your progress while you're down on a planet, which might actually be one of the bigger negatives about this game, as some of those levels can be quite big, and it can take you quite a while to work out what it is you need to do, so restarting it isn't all that fun. Though they do get a lot simpler once you know what you're doing, but getting to that point might take you a while. And if you make it all the way to the end and fail the last space combat, which is quite likely seeing the huge number of ships they throw at you, you'll get to play as Picard again down on Viridian 3. Now the first part of this mission is quite short.
I'm afraid you're too late, Captain. Or perhaps just in time.
But it picks up again when you have to go back to the Enterprise and try and stop Soren from using the drive section to launch torpedoes. And it is quite fun to move around in first person around these familiar areas.
Overgrown viruses of some sort. This should open the turbolift doors.
Torpedo launched.
We're taking heavy damage, sir.
How bad is it?
All primary systems are out.
But between those parts, you get to play as the man, the legend himself, Kirk.
And you, Kirk, are a dead man.
Who leaves the Nexus to take on some nasty jumps and some Klingons?
Klingons? What have they got to do with this?
I don't remember there being Klingons on this planet in the film.
Looks like these caverns were carved out by volcanic activity.
Now this whole area is a bit of a platforming nightmare, which really could be said for any of the other platforming bits of the game as well, as none of them are all that great. But this was the early days of FPS games, where they still had to learn that platforming in the first person view should be avoided at all costs. But you do get to shoot at lots of Klingons, which, well, you know Kirk enjoys that.
There's a reason you Klingons could never kill.
Throughout the game you will come across a number of really cool moments. Like in the first mission, you get to see the old 1701D out of a window, which gets a reaction from our hero.
She is a beautiful ship, isn't she?
Other missions allow you to interact with the environments with some really nice touches.
Not a very hospitable world, but I don't imagine that would bother the Chodak.
And the last mission has a few of them as well, including a callback to, well, a not-so-beloved movie.
I know this ship like the back of my hand.
And if you pick the right escape pod at the very end, you might find a missing pet.
Hello, what's this?
Now I've mentioned that running out of juice for your weapon can be a real problem. But you do have a backup option, the melee attack, which is, well, it's quite something. Picard, well, he gets to karate chop things, which can break open walls.
This wall has been damaged.
Wolf attacks with, well, what looks like claws. Beverly has a kick that can rival the mighty boot. Just look at that leg go. You can see why she was the dancing doctor. And Troy, well, she gets this, which seems to be somewhere between a slap and a Vulcan nerve pinch, that I'm not sure she ever learnt in the series.
This is my best.
And Kirk, well, he had to get his signature double-handed punch. So far, this game hasn't shown up on any of the digital stores, so if you want to play it, you will have to try and track down a copy, which is the same as all the other Microprose or Spectrum Holobyte games, as none of them have been republished either.
Warp core breach in 15 minutes.
So this was a bit of an odd title, as it tried to bridge the eras between the adventure game and the first person, and well, as we've seen, it had a bit of a mixed result. But it is quite an interesting title and quite unique. So until next time, I've been the Goldfish, live long and prosper, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can let me know down in the comments, or you can use those buttons just below. You know the ones I mean. Or if you're not sure yet, then you can check out 2 other videos that I've done that are on the screen right now. So thank you again, and I hope to see you soon.